Welcome back to another deep dive. We're incredibly glad you're here with us today.
Absolutely.
Because if you are currently navigating the modern manosphere, or, if you consider yourself part of the men's rights movement, and you really want to understand the history of our institutions before they were, as today's author vigorously argues, completely captured by feminists and Marxists, well, you're going to want to pull up a chair for this one.
Yeah, it's a heavy one today.
It really is. We are looking at an ultra-long, highly polarizing, and incisive text today. It's truly a fascinating read for red-pilled manosphere men and men's rights activists alike. But real quick, before we jump into the deep end, please take a quick second to like and subscribe to the show.
Makes a huge difference.
It genuinely does. It helps us bring these deep dives to you every single week. So today, we are doing a comprehensive cover-to-cover review of a massive ebook that is available right now on Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books.
That's right. The book we are examining is a sprawling 2025 manifesto by Conrad Riker, and it's titled Low Quality Women.
Quite the title.
Yeah, he's not bearing the lead there. The core mission of our deep dive today is to unpack the foundational arguments, the specific data points, and the really sweeping evolutionary claims presented in this text.
Right.
It is heavily aimed at a red pill audience, serving as this highly aggressive, deeply systematic critique of modern gender dynamics.
Right.
But before we dive into his specific data, I do need to give a quick reminder for you listening.
Go ahead.
Our goal today is to act purely as your impartial guides. This book touches the absolute third rail of modern politics, feminism, and gender dynamics. So we aren't here to endorse his views, nor are we here to debunk his claims.
Exactly.
Our aim is simply to pull apart his core arguments so you can see exactly what is driving this massive cultural conversation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Riker definitely does not hold back right from page 1.
No, he doesn't.
The foundational argument of this entire manifesto rests squarely on evolutionary biology. Basically, his central premise is that men and women are fundamentally wired differently by millions of years of evolution, and that modern society's attempt to simply ignore or trying to legislate away this biology is leading directly to civilizational collapse.
Which is a bold thesis.
Very bold. Now, if you follow this space, you know the basics of biological hardwiring and hypergamy. But I want to get into Riker's specific angle here. How exactly does he build this case?
Well, he relies heavily on the field of evolutionary psychology to lay his groundwork. Specifically, he cites the renowned research of Dr. David Buss.
Oh, right, the cross-cultural studies.
Exactly. Buss conducted these massive behavioral studies across 37 different global cultures. And Riker uses Buss's data to argue that universally, regardless of geography or culture, women are biologically hardwired to prioritize resources, status, and physical protection in their mates.
And for men.
On the flip side, men are evolutionarily wired to prioritize youth and fertility. They're seeking out subconscious visual cues, like a specific waist-to-hip ratio, for example. So the author's overarching point in these early chapters is that a modern gender studies degree or a corporate HR diversity initiative simply cannot rewrite 200,000 years of human brain wiring.
So if he's claiming our biology is stuck in the Stone Age, essentially, how does he apply that to something as fiercely modern as, say, a smartphone?
That's where he brings in the apps.
Right. Does he actually look at the dating app economy? Because we all know the infamous Tinder swipe statistics. The whole idea that 80 to 90% of women are swiping right on just the top 5 to 10% of men.
The Pareto principle applied to dating.
Exactly. The whole digital caste system argument where average guys are totally invisible while the top-tier men monopolize all the attention. What is Riker's unique takeaway from that specific data point?
What's fascinating here is how Riker connects this extreme dating app behavior to a broader, highly volatile societal concept he calls the provider paradox.
The provider paradox. Okay, explain that.
He argues that modern women are essentially living in a permanent state of cognitive dissonance.
How so?
On one hand, their prehistoric biology demands traditional male provisioning. They instinctively want the man to pay for the expensive first date, to hold the door, to be the stoic, unshakable protector when a physical threat arises.
Right, the traditional masculine ideals.
Exactly. But on the exact same hand, they have widely adopted modern feminist ideologies that aggressively critique and dismantle those very same traditional gender roles as tools of patriarchal oppression.
Wait, so he's arguing that women demand a traditional provider, but simultaneously want to dismantle the traditional gender roles that actually create that provider.
That's his exact argument.
How does he claim that actually plays out in a normal day-to-day relationship? Because that sounds like a recipe for disaster.
He claims it creates an entirely rigged game. In Riker's view, modern men are expected to perform all the traditional heavy lifting duties of historic masculinity, but they are flatly denied the traditional respect, deference, and authority that used to accompany those duties.
I see.
So the man is expected to assume all the traditional risks and financial burdens, while the woman assumes all the modern ideological liberties.
Wow. It's like demanding a Michelin star meal while actively calling the chef your oppressor.
That's a pretty accurate summary of his tone, yeah?
That is a heavy concept, and this brings us directly into Riker's broader critique of modern institutions, which we mentioned at the top of the show. Because he doesn't just think the dating market is rigged, he thinks the entire legal and societal framework has been hijacked to systematically punish men.
Yes, the institutional capture argument.
Let's talk about the courts. He dedicates a massive portion of the book to the divorce and family court system, which he flat out labels the divorce industrial complex.
The statistics he presents to support this institutional critique are really the beating heart of his argument for the red pill audience.
What kind of numbers are we talking about here?
Riker lays out data claiming that women currently initiate 70 to 80% of all divorces. And very often, he notes, this happens under no-fault divorce laws, where the man has done absolutely nothing legally wrong.
Okay. And after the split?
Following these splits, he claims women win 80 to 90% of physical custody battles, and they receive a staggering 97% of all alimony payments.
97%? That is a massive asymmetry.
It is. He frames the family court system as essentially a gynocentric enforcement arm of the state. He describes a machine that treats men as walking ATMs, forcibly extracting their resources to fund the independent lifestyles of their ex-wives.
Even when the woman initiated the divorce.
Sometimes even in cases where the marriage ended due to female infidelity, according to his examples.
Looking at that data, it seems like he views men strictly as utilities in the eyes of the state, useful only for their physical labor and financial extraction.
That's exactly his point.
Because he shares these brutal anecdotes in the book of men sleeping in their trucks or cramped studio apartments while their ex-wives live in the marital home with new boyfriends, and it's all funded by the ex-husband's 80-hour work weeks.
Yeah, he leans heavily into those visceral examples.
Does this utility mindset tie into his argument about the workplace? How does he counter the standard feminist talking point of the gender wage gap? Because that's usually the counter-argument to male financial dominance.
It ties in perfectly. If we connect this to the bigger picture of institutional capture, Riker counters the wage gap by introducing what he calls the death gap.
The death gap.
This is a pivotal argument in the book. Riker points out that 93% of all workplace fatalities are men.
93%.
Yes. The loggers, the roofers, the deep shaft miners, the oil riggers, the sanitation workers. The people doing the absolute most dangerous, lethal, back-breaking jobs to keep society running are almost entirely male.
So a man is a physical utility on the oil rig and a financial utility in the family court.
Precisely. He argues that male disposability is the dark, unspoken foundation of modern infrastructure.
That's a grim picture.
His critique is that society is perfectly happy to rely on men to bleed, sweat, and literally die to build civilization. But the moment a man sits in an air-conditioned corporate boardroom, his presence is suddenly labeled as patriarchal oppression.
That is a stark synthesis of his views on the state. It's an interesting juxtaposition. So how early does he say the systemic anti-male bias starts? Does he trace this back to childhood?
He traces it directly to the modern education system.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He argues that female-dominated schools literally pathologize normal, healthy male behavior. He cites data showing that boys receive 71% of all school suspensions.
Wow. Over 2/3.
Right. And if a young boy is energetic, loud, or naturally competitive, Riker says the system doesn't channel that masculine energy into productive avenues anymore. It simply drugs it into submission.
Ah, the medication angle.
He points to the massive historic spike in young boys being medicated for ADHD, claiming schools are essentially chemically castrating boys into compliance because the institution no longer knows how to handle raw masculinity.
And I imagine that institutional capture only accelerates once those boys reach higher education.
Without a doubt. Riker highlights university campuses as the ultimate battleground, specifically targeting Title IX proceedings.
Title IX, right, the campus tribunals.
Exactly. The book describes these collegiate tribunals as kangaroo courts, where due process has been entirely gutted. He claims that following federal guidelines issued over the past decade, universities operate on a strict presumption of male guilt.
Presumption of guilt, so flipping the standard legal model.
Right? In these settings, he argues unverified accusations can completely destroy a young man's academic and professional life without him ever having the right to legal representation or even the right to directly cross-examine his accuser.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because Riker doesn't just tear down these modern institutions and leave it at that. He sets up a stark, undeniable contrast between modern feminist lifestyles and highly traditional communities.
He loves a dichotomy.
He really does. Let's look at the demographics he pulls up. Talk to me about what he calls the motherhood desert.
Right. The motherhood desert is Riker's specific term for the severe demographic and cultural consequences of women prioritizing corporate ladders over family formation.
Okay, delaying starting a family.
Exactly. He argues that modern feminism sold women a catastrophic lie. The idea that they can delay motherhood indefinitely while they chase a career.
Biology eventually catches up.
That's his point. He points out the biological reality that female fertility crashes significantly after age 30, and by age 40, it is a massive, often insurmountable biological hurdle.
The biological clock.
Yes. The book harshly critiques career-focused women who wake up at 38, realize their biological clock is deafening, and then are forced to rely on exploitative surrogacy agencies or incredibly expensive IVF treatments just to try and buy back the fertility they willingly sacrifice to a corporation.
So if the modern career woman is his cautionary tale, who does he think is actually getting it right? Because he points to the Amish, which initially sounds like a wild pivot for a red pill manifesto.
It does seem out of left field at first.
But why them specifically? What does the data show?
He uses the Amish as his absolute prime example of traditionalism's triumph. The book praises Amish communities for completely and utterly rejecting modern feminism.
I mean, they certainly do that.
Right. And he notes the data to back up their success. They have incredibly high fertility rates, with the average Amish woman having her last child at age 21.
Oh, wow.
They have virtually zero divorce, and their intergenerational community businesses succeed at a remarkable 95% rate.
95%. That's practically unheard of in the modern economy.
Exactly. And all of this, Riker argues, is achieved through a strict, unapologetic adherence to traditional gender roles. The men provide, protect, and build. The women nurture, support, and raise the children. To Riker, this is perfect biological alignment.
It's fascinating that he uses the Amish as his utopia of biological alignment. But let's look at the other extreme of his argument. If the Amish represent biological alignment to him, what does he consider biological rebellion?
Oh, that would be the body positivity movement.
Right. That brings us to his chapter on body positivity.
Yes, and when Riker looks at the body positivity movement, he doesn't hold back at all. He views it through a purely biological lens, completely dismissing any of the social or emotional aspects of fat acceptance.
He just ignores the self-esteem argument entirely.
Entirely. He labels the movement a dangerous contagion. And to back this up, he cites a 2022 University of Michigan study that tracked prominent influencers within this space.
What did the study find?
He points out that their documented cheat days averaged around 5,800 calories.
5,800.
Yes, which is triple the daily intake of an average adult man. Furthermore, the study claimed that 89% of these specific influencers were pre-diabetic.
So he argues that this movement is pure destructive delusion.
Exactly.
Riker states that obesity directly correlates with a plummeting sexual market value and severe undeniable fertility issues. He says evolution explicitly hardwired men to be attracted to markers of health and fertility.
Right, going back to the David Buss data.
Therefore, an ideological movement telling women that obesity is beautiful and healthy is actually setting them up for a lifetime of loneliness and massive medical bills while they loudly wonder where all the good men have gone.
That is his exact phrasing, yes.
So what does this all mean for the listener? If the dating market is a rigged game, the institutions presume male guilt, and modern culture is pushing biological rebellion, what is the red-pilled man supposed to do?
Now we get to the prescriptive part of the book.
Right. This is where Riker pivots from diagnosing the disease to prescribing the cure. He offers very specific, actionable advice to his male audience. and it starts with hardcore financial self-defense.
Riker is absolutely adamant that men must armor plate their assets against the family courts.
Armor plate, good term.
He outlines extreme financial strategies for men to protect themselves from what he views as state-sponsored wealth extraction. But he doesn't just name drop these strategies, he really details them.
For instance.
Well, he heavily advocates for setting up Cook Islands, Foreign Asset Protection Trusts, or FAPTs.
Let's break that down because he drops some heavy financial jargon there. How does a Cook Islands trust actually work to protect a guy in a divorce?
A Cook Islands trust essentially moves your assets outside of United States jurisdiction. So even if a U.S. family court judge orders a 50-50 split of your wealth to give to your ex-wife, the foreign trust legally ignores that U.S. court order because it isn't bound by American family law.
Wow, so it's basically a legal firewall.
Exactly. Riker is telling his readers to build an impenetrable financial fortress. He also advocates for utilizing Wyoming anonymous LLCs.
And what do those do?
These allow a man to shield his real estate and business holdings without his name ever appearing on public ownership registries.
Oh, I see. Total privacy.
And finally, he heavily emphasizes converting vulnerable fiat wealth into decentralized cryptocurrency like Bitcoin.
Because it's off the grid.
Right. Because Bitcoin is held on a private ledger. He argues it is incredibly difficult for a divorce lawyer to trace or subject to equitable distribution. The overarching message is clear. Do not leave your hard-earned wealth exposed to a system explicitly designed to give it to your ex-wife.
But ideally, he says, you avoid the courts in that trap entirely by learning how to spot low-quality traits in women before you ever sign a marriage license.
The red flag section.
Right? He gives his readers a literal checklist of behavioral red flags to watch out for. For example, if she has high consumer credit card debt fueled by lifestyle inflation, basically financing an Instagram illusion she can't afford to run.
That's a big one for him.
Or she has multiple male orbiters in her DMs that she conveniently claims are just networking contacts, run. He also warns intensely against women with heavily filtered social media presences.
The deception angle.
Yeah. And he even cites data saying that having multiple political bumper stickers on a car is a statistical predictor of road rage and emotional instability.
That's a very specific list.
Yeah.
And if a man can internalize all of this, the biology, the financial defense, the red flags, the book's ultimate solution is what Riker calls the masculinity renaissance.
The Renaissance. What does that look like in practice?
He advocates for men to simply walk away from the current system that pathologizes them. This involves seeking out male-only brotherhoods and actively rejecting the profound isolation of the modern office cubicle.
Getting back to nature, right? He talks a lot about these extreme retreats.
Exactly. He highlights the incredible success of wilderness survival retreats, taking groups of men entirely off-grid into the deep wilderness of Alaska or Montana for days without screens or smartphones.
No tech at all.
None. Forcing them to split logs, build fires, and hunt for their food. Riker claims these harsh, demanding environments literally reboot a man's testosterone levels and clear the psychological brain fog caused by modern, estrogenic corporate environments.
He says it's about men finally refusing to apologize for their deep biological drive to protect, conquer, and lead. He wants men to stop playing by the rules of a game that was explicitly redesigned to make them lose.
That's the core of the red pill philosophy right there.
And that is a worldview that is undeniably gaining massive traction right now. Understanding the depth of this anger, the financial strategies they are adopting, and the specific data points they are rallying around is absolutely crucial for understanding our current cultural divide.
It really is. Regardless of how one views Riker's highly polarizing rhetoric, this manifesto represents a growing and deeply entrenched ecosystem. The manosphere, red pill communities, and men's rights activists are looking at the exact same societal data as everyone else.
The divorce rates, the suicide rates.
The workplace fatalities, yes. And they are concluding that modern gender dynamics are not a progressive march toward equality, but a biological and legal battleground where men are the designated casualties.
Well said. We want to remind you to please like and subscribe to the show so you never miss a deep dive into the ideas shaping our world. And if you are intrigued by this breakdown, if you consider yourself part of this movement and want to read the unabridged source material and dive into the history of these institutions for yourself, make sure to check out Amazon, Kindle, and Google Play Books right now to buy the ebook Low Quality Women.
It's definitely comprehensive text.
It is a massive read. You can also follow the author at Conrad and Riker, directly at his Substack for more of his uncensored writings, data dumps, and ongoing commentary.
As we wrap up today's analysis, this raises an important question, and I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own.
Let's hear it.
If human behavior is truly as rigidly defined by evolutionary biology and prehistoric brain wiring as the author insists it is, how do we account for the incredible, sprawling diversity of family structures, cooperative societies, and shifting gender norms that have independently evolved and thrived across thousands of different human cultures throughout our entire history?